Beneath the surface of the Pacific lies a world older than myth and deeper than fear, where shadows stretch for miles and legends don't die, they wait. From ancient gods with tentacles to creatures science refuses to acknowledge, these aren't bedtime stories, they're warning signs. So if you think the ocean is quiet, think again. This is 30 terrifying mythical creatures under the Pacific Ocean, and some of them are listening. Before we dive too deep, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what else lurks below. And while you're here, drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Midnight? 3 a.m.? Just curious who else can't sleep tonight. 1. Taniwa. It always starts the same way. A ripple, a hush, a cold current sliding against the hull of your boat, like something down there is watching you with eyes older than your language. Locals don't speak its name easily. Taniwa, not because they're scared of the word, but because they're scared it might answer back. In Maori mythology, Taniwa are not your average sea monsters. They don't just lurk, they dwell in underwater caves, coastal shallows, deep river bends, and tidal gulfs where the maps start to blur. Each one is different, as if the ocean plays dress-up with your deepest fears. Some look like giant lizards or whales with twisted spines. Others come as invisible forces that shake the ground and split open the sea. But the one thing they all share, a chilling fondness for boundaries between land and water, myth and memory, life and the other thing. Some Taniwha were said to guard tribes, acting as ancestral protectors. Others, less so. They were the ones who demanded offerings, devoured wanderers, and dragged canoes under without leaving bubbles. Which kind you got depended on whether your ancestors made deals or broke them. Here's the catch. Even the protective ones had conditions. Betray those terms, build where you shouldn't, take what isn't yours, and the guardian becomes the destroyer. Whole villages have claimed to relocate after accidents blamed on a displeased Taniwa. Roads in New Zealand have been rerouted to avoid their lairs. That's not poetic, that's policy. There's a story, just one among many. A tribe ignored warnings and built too close to a sacred inlet. One morning, the entire shoreline was gone, not flooded, gone, as if the ocean had taken a single, deliberate bite out of the land. The elders said the Taniwa had swallowed the beach whole. Officials blamed erosion. The locals nodded politely and quietly rebuilt somewhere else, farther inland. Modern skeptics like to say these are just cautionary tales, metaphors to keep kids away from dangerous waters, but the metaphors have a funny way of lining up with seismic records, sinkholes, and unexplained drownings in placid bays. Engineers encounter landslides where geologists swear none should occur. Fishermen avoid areas where GPS goes blind, and divers report sudden pressure drops and echoing groans from caverns no sonar has mapped. What makes the Taniwa terrifying isn't just what it is, it's when it is. You see, this creature doesn't haunt the past. It moves forward alongside us, morphs. In the stories of today, the Taniwa appears beneath oil rigs, near undersea cables, along freight routes. It doesn't sleep. It just waits for the next line to cross. And so you're left wondering, is it the creature that's mythical, or just our arrogance in believing we've tamed the sea? But here's the more unsettling thought. What if the Taniwa isn't alone? What if it's just the first thing watching from the deep, the one who makes the introduction before the others arrive? Because farther out, in waters warmer and stranger, there's a creature said to be the size of a reef and the shape of your worst claustrophobic dream, a shell that doesn't open, a trap disguised as treasure, a mouth with pearls for teeth. It waits with its lid ajar. Its name is Pua Tutahi. Tu Pua Tutahi. If the Taniwa was the warning, then Puatutahi is the consequence, a name barely whispered among Polynesian elders, drifting like a current through the oral traditions of Tahiti, Tuamotu, and beyond. It's a monster disguised as silence, a clam the size of a shipwreck, ancient and patient, waiting for the curious, the greedy, and the unlucky to drift just a little too close. Puatutahi means first shell, but don't let that gentle name fool you. This is no decorative mollusk. It's a predator, one that doesn't chase, doesn't roar, doesn't even move, at least not in a way you'd expect. It just waits, sits on the ocean floor with its mouth open, its jagged interior shimmering like the inside of a gemstone. It's beautiful. That's the trap. Iridescent, luminous, hypnotic. Divers have reported seeing what they thought were submerged temples, gleaming marble structures nestled in coral reefs, only to realize too late that the walls were closing in. Because that's what Puatutahi does best. It lets you make the first move. In the legends, it was said to lure warriors and fishermen with promises of pearls beyond imagination, not the kind you string into necklaces, but pearls the size of skulls, white, red, and black as night. It said one such pearl could buy an island or start a war. And so, of course, someone always dives. They always do. But once you're inside, the light shifts. The sound goes strange. The currents reverse. You feel weightless, then heavy, then light again. And by the time you realize that you're not inside a cave, you're inside a mouth, it's already too late. Here's where it gets worse. Puatutahi doesn't always kill. Sometimes it just keeps you trapped in a kind of suspended moment. The stories say that in its depths, the creature contains the bones of entire canoe crews, still preserved, perfectly posed, like coral statues, a museum of mistakes. And if that's true, if those bodies are still down there, not decomposed, not bloated, just paused, then the implication is that the clam doesn't just feed, it collects. In some tales, it's said that Faumea, the eel woman goddess of the sea, once tried to destroy Puatutahi, but even she failed. She cracked its shell with a spear of bone and lightning, and for a moment the monster withdrew into the black, hissing through the water like 1,000 knives. But it wasn't dead, just deeper. Since then, the stories say, the clam learned caution. It stopped sitting in the shallows. It went down. And now, no one knows exactly where it is. Maybe it drifts between atolls. Maybe it anchors itself beneath tectonic plates. But every now and then, someone drops a depth scanner and picks up a reading. Symmetrical, curved, almost too perfect to be natural. The sonar pings, then it cuts out. And when the machine comes back up, the data's blank, as if it was swallowed. Of course, scientists brush it off. Glitches, equipment failure, misreadings caused by thermal vents or rogue currents. Nothing unusual except for the divers who vanish, the boats that disappear over flat seas, the strange bioluminescent shimmer reported off reef edges where there should be nothing at all. But maybe, just maybe, you don't need a depth scanner to find it. Maybe it's been following tectonic lines, migrating, growing. Maybe right now it's sitting somewhere beneath a research vessel, mouth open, silent. After all, legends say you only see Puatutahi once, and even then, you don't realize it until you're already inside. Still, if you think that's unsettling, wait until you meet her, because deeper still, beneath the kelp forests and blackwater chasms, there's something waiting with skin like an eel and a mouth full of human memory. She's called Faumea. If you're still with us after that, you're exactly the kind of person this channel was made for. So hit that subscribe button. We've got a lot more waiting beneath the surface. And while you're at it, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Just wondering who else is wandering the deep end this late. 3. Faumea. You could call her a goddess or a curse wearing a woman's shape. In the legends of the Tuamotus and the far reaches of French Polynesia, Falmea isn't simply a creature, she's a contradiction given form, an eel woman, both divine and dangerous, whose story is as slippery as the things she's said to resemble. She's not monstrous in the loud way of sea serpents or krakens. Her horror comes softly through the gaps between what is human and what isn't, through the quiet knowledge that the sea remembers everything we throw into it, including ourselves. In the oldest chants, Falmea is described as emerging from the foam at the edge of creation, not born exactly, but assembled, a being made from the first salt, the first shimmer, the first hunger. Her hair is said to flow like black current, her eyes like twin tidal pools where fish dart and vanish. The skin, slick, glistening, eel-like, never dries. Even when she walks on land, she carries the dampness of the ocean with her. When she speaks, the wind tastes of brine. When she laughs, shells split open along the shore. Sailors tell each other she appears before storms, a woman on the horizon, standing on the waves, hair streaming like kelp. She gestures, not in warning, but invitation. The older sailors drop their eyes and mutter old prayers. The younger ones, of course, always look. They say if you stare long enough, the outline of her body begins to ripple. The woman becomes a shimmer. The shimmer becomes a shape, and the shape becomes a shadow long enough to wrap around a ship's hull. Then the sea grows still, and that's somehow worse than waves. Falmea's myth isn't consistent. In some stories, she's a companion to gods, lover to Tangaroa, the sea deity and mother of heroes. In others, she's a predator, ensnaring mortals who dare to cross the sacred reefs. The scholars call it duality. The locals call it Tuesday, because in island mythology, gods don't have to choose between mercy and malice. They just are. A legend says that Falmea once helped a mortal named Turi who wanted to cross forbidden waters. She granted him safe passage on one condition: he must never speak her name again after reaching land. For a while he kept the vow, but pride has a short half-life. He built a canoe, led voyages, told tales of the eel woman who guarded him. One night, while recounting the story near a lagoon, he said her name out loud, just once. The tide turned without warning. The lagoon emptied, then filled again with roaring white foam. The next morning, the shoreline was smooth as glass. No footprints, no canoe, just silence and one long eel track carved into the sand. Scientists might dismiss that as mythic metaphor, a story for respecting the sea, or perhaps a parable about humility. But there's something curious about that lagoon. Even now, divers claim to see an odd shimmer below the surface, a distortion that blurs cameras and sonar. Locals refuse to swim there. They say Falmea never forgets a broken promise, and she always collects on a debt. And maybe that's the heart of it. Falmea isn't a monster in the way we imagine them. She's consequence, alive, patient, inevitable, the sea's version of memory. If Taniwa guards and Puatutahi devours, Falmea simply reminds. She reminds us that water doesn't forgive, it archives. Every broken vow, every careless trespass, every name spoken too loudly near the surf, it all gets stored somewhere beneath those shimmering waves. And if you've ever felt that sudden chill while wading waist deep, when the water shifts temperature for no reason, maybe that's her. Maybe she's brushing past, listening, deciding whether to remember you. Because not far from her domain, along the fog-wrapped shores of the Pacific Northwest, another guardian prowls the boundary between sea and spirit, part wolf, part tide, all transformation. It doesn't just remember, it judges. Its name is Gonakadet, the sea wolf. For Gonakadet, sea wolf, in the fog-choked inlets of the Pacific Northwest, where the pine trees lean like old men whispering secrets to the sea, there are stories the ocean doesn't let go of. Stories about a creature that walks between two worlds, fur and foam, land and water, spirit and flesh. The Gonakadet, or sea wolf, isn't just a legend, it's a warning that the boundaries you think are solid aren't. The Tlingit, Haida, and other indigenous coastal peoples tell of the sea wolf as a shapeshifter, sometimes a lone wolf, gleaming and white, seen walking the shoreline where no wolf should be. Sometimes a monstrous hybrid, slipping beneath the surface with the grace of a seal and the hunger of a hunter, but always the Gonakadet is tied to transformation of people, places, and fates. In some stories, it's a former human, cast out or cast away, transformed by the sea as punishment or mercy. In others, it's a spirit beast that appears to the deserving, bringing fortune, strength, even glimpses of the future. Sightings are rare, but when they happen, things change. A poor fisherman becomes rich overnight. A village survives a famine. A warrior gains invincibility in battle. But there's a price, always. Gifts from the Gonakadet don't come without consequence. Some elders speak of a sea cave, hidden somewhere in the misty archipelagos where the sea wolf lives, surrounded by treasures of the deep, driftwood thrones, whale bones polished by time, and ancient carvings that glow with some unspoken memory. But no one who goes looking for the cave ever finds it. Those who stumble upon it by accident don't always return. The sea wolf reveals itself only when it chooses to. You don't summon it, it summons you. And it doesn't always bring good fortune. In some tales, it appears as a harbinger. Villagers see it walking along the beach at twilight, salt mist trailing behind its paws, eyes gleaming like wet quartz. Within days, a storm arrives, or a stranger, or a ship that never should have docked. Not evil exactly, just inevitable, as if the sea wolf is a messenger of something larger, something neither kind nor cruel, just ancient. Anthropologists call the Gonakadet a cultural metaphor. Biologists write off sightings as misidentified sea lions, albino wolves, or tricks of the mist. But then someone shows up with a photograph. Blurry, yes, but unmistakably wrong. Not a wolf, not a seal, something in between, caught mid-stride at the edge of the surf. No clear tracks left behind, just a disturbed pattern in the sand, shaped like a ripple or a paw print or both. And still the fog rolls in, quiet and heavy. You begin to wonder, if a creature can cross between land and water, maybe it can cross between other things too, like memory and myth, real and imagined, living and something else entirely. But even the sea wolf has something to fear, because farther north in the dark, frozen stretches of the Aleutian chain, there's a whisper of a creature far less forgiving, a thing with a throat like a key and a hunger too large for metaphor, a beast that doesn't choose or judge, it simply swallows. Its name is Galagatax. 5. Galagatax. In the wind-lashed, salt-bitten chain of the Aleutian Islands, the sea is not a place you visit. It's a force that decides whether you leave. It's gray, vast, and thick with silence that feels occupied. Here, the Unangax people speak of Galagatax, a name that tastes like rocks and cold when spoken aloud. It's not said often, not out of superstition, but respect, or maybe a little fear. Galagatax isn't sleek or seductive. There's no shimmer or spiritual blessing in its wake. It's brute ocean power, clumsy, massive, and relentless. The stories say it's a creature so large it can swallow a kayak whole without breaking stride. It's not hunting you. You're just in its way, sometimes described as part whale, part reptile, with eyes like deep cracks in basalt. Galagatax is never fully seen. Witnesses only report what it feels like, currents pulling in the wrong direction, pressure dropping as if the ocean's holding its breath, and then emptiness, a vast blank space beneath the waves where life should be. No fish, no birds, no sound, just a void, dragging you downward. In old Unangax tales, Galagatax is the sea's punishment for hubris, a spirit beast born from the first broken promise between humans and water. One version claims a village grew too greedy, took too much from the sea, ignored the ceremonies, wasted the catch. So the creature rose, not in fury, in silence. It swallowed their boats, their nets, eventually their village itself. The shoreline collapsed overnight. Where it once stood, only a steep shelf remained, leading into black. Researchers have investigated some of these collapses. They cite erosion, seismic activity, and permafrost thaw. And maybe they're right, or maybe they're just describing how Galagatax moves. Some fishermen say they felt it pass under them, an unseen bulk brushing the boat from below, tipping it slightly, then gone. No waves, no wake, just a soft moan in the hull, like the ocean thinking out loud. The GPS glitches. The sonar blanks out. Your compass forgets north. And if you're lucky, that's all that happens. The creature doesn't roar. It doesn't show teeth. It doesn't need to. Its power lies in the impossibility of its scale, the idea that something that big can exist undetected in a part of the ocean we think we've mapped. But we haven't. Not really. The Aleutian depths are full of dark canyons and cold trenches no cameras ever touched. And sometimes something in those depths touches back. You tell yourself it's just a tale until your kayak starts to drift sideways against the wind, until you look down and see nothing, not murky water, nothing. Like the sea has opened a mouth beneath you, and you are already halfway inside it. And if you listen carefully, there's a sound, low, wide, not so much heard as felt, a breathing, but not yours. You'd scream, but the sea doesn't care for noise. Then, just like that, it's gone. You're floating in silence, alive but not untouched. And maybe that's the point. Galagatax doesn't want to kill you. It wants you to go back and tell people, let them know that something's still out there. Which brings us back down the coast to a gentler name with just as many teeth, a creature that plays peekaboo with beachcombers and hides in cold Pacific bays. They call it Cadborosaurus. 6. Cadborosaurus. Caddy. There's something peculiar about the Pacific Northwest. The forests are too quiet. The fog clings too long. And the waters, especially around British Columbia and the Washington coast, seem to carry more than just tide. They carry secrets, long, slithering ones. That's where the legend of Cadborosaurus lives, or swims, or waits, known more casually and perhaps affectionately as Caddy. Cadborosaurus has been spotted for over a century by sailors, fishermen, ferry passengers, and the occasional unlucky swimmer. Descriptions vary, but the core remains the same. A serpentine sea creature, anywhere from 15 to 40 feet long, with a horse-like head, flippers, and a body that undulates through the water like a ribbon in the wind. It moves too fast for a log, too graceful for a whale, and too deliberate for your imagination. The name Cadborosaurus itself is a stitched-together label born from Cadboro Bay near Victoria, BC, and the word saurus, meaning lizard, a tidy name for a messy mystery. Witnesses claim to see humps, sometimes 3 or 4, breaking the surface like a line of sea buoys, only moving. The creature rarely shows itself fully, but it moves in a way that seems coordinated, intelligent. You watch it the way you watch something you're not supposed to see, with curiosity first, then unease. The earliest written accounts date back to the 1930s, but oral traditions from the indigenous peoples of the region describe a similar creature long before that, serpent-like beings who lived in the bays and came up during certain moon phases or seasonal tides. Some believe they were omens, others just neighbors with very strict boundaries. In 1937, a whaling station on Naden Harbor reportedly pulled a carcass from a sperm whale's stomach. It looked wrong. Not a fish, not a seal. The body was long, limbless except for flipper-like projections, and had a head more akin to a camel than any known sea creature. The photo of this half-digested cryptid made the rounds. Some called it a hoax, Others swore it was the proof they'd been waiting for. Unfortunately, the carcass vanished before it could be properly studied. Classic. Modern scientists chalk caddy sightings up to misidentifications, oarfish, basking sharks, floating seaweed caught in current patterns. But these explanations tend to dissolve when you talk to the witnesses, seasoned mariners, commercial divers, Coast Guard officers, people who know the ocean and its moods. These aren't tourists mistaking kelp for Leviathan. These are people who don't scare easily. And still, their voices drop when they talk about what they saw. There's a strange duality to Cadbrosaurus. It's terrifying in implication, something large and unknown living this close to civilization, but strangely calm in demeanor. No attacks, no stories of destruction, just glimpses. Maybe it's curious, maybe it's old, maybe it's just tired of being misidentified. And maybe that's why it keeps its distance, because unlike the creatures who haunt Trench in myth, Caddy lives just out of reach, always one wave ahead of the lens, always retreating before we can define it. But not all mysteries are quiet, not all stay distant. Some come too close. Some are born not in folklore, but on message boards, tabloid pages, and grainy polar expedition logs. Some rise up from nowhere and refuse to go away. One in particular comes from the ice. Its name is Ningen. 7 Ningen. It's hard to trust a story that begins on a Japanese message board, but that's where the modern legend of the Ningen first surfaced, like the creature itself, rising quietly, chillingly from below. It started with a supposed sighting by a research crew near Antarctica, operating for a Japanese government marine agency. They weren't looking for monsters, they were looking for cold water species. What they found didn't fit any taxonomy chart. According to the tale, the crew spotted something immense, at least 20 to 30 meters long, moving just beneath the surface. At first, they assumed it was a submarine or iceberg. Then it moved against the current. Then it blinked. What they claimed to see was not a fish, not a squid, but a humanoid, pale white, with long limbs, no visible facial expression, just the suggestion of eyes, maybe a mouth. Some versions describe it as having arms and legs, like a massive underwater mannequin. Others say it has fins instead of limbs, but with disturbingly human proportions. Imagine a colossal statue from a drowned civilization. That's breathing. The word ninjin means human in Japanese, but this thing is more like a parody of one, something trying to be human, but only getting the shape right, and even that, just barely. Over the years, reports of the Ningen have accumulated, primarily from Japanese fishing vessels and Antarctic expeditions. They describe eerily similar sightings, a massive pale figure moving silently through the deep, sometimes lying motionless at the surface like a corpse that refuses to rot. Most attempts to photograph it result in blurry images or strangely distorted pixels, as if the sea itself doesn't want this thing documented. Some believe it's a cryptid. Others argue it's a deep sea mutation, perhaps some form of albino ray, or a colossal jellyfish with humanoid features. But conspiracy theorists insist on something more disturbing, that the Japanese government knows about the Ningen and has been actively covering it up. Why? No one's quite sure. Some say it's because the Ningen isn't biological, that it might be something synthetic or ancient or both. There's a theory, half rational, half whispered, that the Ningen isn't a creature, but a survivor, a leftover from a time when the planet was colder, the oceans deeper, and humanity wasn't alone. Not aliens, not gods, something else, something in between, watching us from below, mimicking us out of boredom, or worse, out of interest. What unnerves people isn't just the idea of a sea monster, it's that this one looks like us, or at least what something else might interpret us to be, like a reflection in warped glass, or a dream misremembered. No teeth, no blood, no attack, just the unbearable stillness of a thing shaped like a human that doesn't act like one, that follows you under ice shelves, that floats beside your submersible, that looks back when you stare too long into the dark. And what happens if it ever decides to stop watching and start responding? Some say it already has, just not in ways we understand. And beneath even that mystery, there's another, older, slower, more biblical in scope, a mountain of flesh, a lie disguised as sanctuary. The ancient maps called it Aspidocalon. 8. Aspidochalon. It begins with an island that wasn't there yesterday. Sailors spot it first, a dark, humped shape rising above the waves, ringed by gulls, streaked with moss, strangely still. There's even vegetation on it sometimes, rocks, maybe a few trees if you're lucky. It looks ancient, like it's been waiting there forever. But when the anchor drops and the crew sets foot on it, something is wrong. The soil is too warm. The ground pulses faintly beneath their boots. And then, without warning, the island starts to move. This is the legend of Aspidocalone, the island that isn't. It appears in medieval bestiaries, in sailors' tales, and curiously, in fragments of Pacific maritime lore. A creature the size of a continent, sometimes described as a turtle, sometimes a whale, sometimes something in between, but always colossal, always quiet until it isn't. The name comes from Greek, aspis, shield, and chelone, turtle, but the creature's legend outgrew its etymology long ago. In some versions, Aspidocalone doesn't just trick sailors, it hungers for them. The island lures them with the promise of rest, then submerges slowly, dragging ships and men into the abyss. In others, it's a test of perception, a living warning against trusting what you see. But in every version, one fact holds. If you step onto its back, you'll never be sure if you're on land or alive. In the Pacific, certain atolls have their own variation. Stories of reefs that shift positions between tides, islets that vanish overnight, leaving no trace in satellite images. Fishermen swear that GPS pings bounce off something massive, too slow to be a whale, too organic to be volcanic. The military writes it off as thermal anomalies. Civilians stop asking. There's a Polynesian story about a voyaging canoe that spotted an uncharted island after days lost at sea. Desperate for food and shelter, they landed, cooked a meal, and slept. The next morning, one of them noticed that the horizon had changed, rotated. Then came the groaning. The island rolled beneath them like muscle under skin. Some jumped into the water, some didn't. The survivors swore they saw the shoreline dive, revealing a massive eye beneath the waves as wide as a tide pool, blinking slowly. Aspidocalone doesn't chase. It doesn't need to. The fear lies in its patience, in the idea that the earth itself might occasionally lie, that the line between life and landscape isn't as fixed as we think. And what if it doesn't want to fool you? What if it just exists, so massive, so old, that it doesn't even register you as prey? You're just a brief itch on its back, gone with the next exhale. Because something that size doesn't care about your maps or warnings. It surfaces when it wants. It sleeps where it pleases. It only reminds us of its presence when we step too confidently onto what we think is firm ground, which brings us to a different kind of terror. Not the slow deception of an ancient beast, but the pure violence of arms and tentacles rising from the deep. Not subtle, not silent, a monster that doesn't hide what it is, the one they called Kraken. 9. Kraken. The sea has a temper. Anyone who's spent time on it knows that. It calms, it seethes, but every now and then it lunges. That's the feeling sailors described when they spoke of the Kraken. Not just fear, but the sudden realization that the ocean itself might reach up and tear you from the surface. Most associate the Kraken with Norse mythology, with tales from the Atlantic or Arctic waters. But here's the thing. You don't get a creature into every culture's maritime lore unless it moves. And the Kraken, it seems, migrates. In the Pacific, sightings have a familiar rhythm. Ships that vanish mid-transmission, fishing lines ripped from hands, giant shadows that appear on sonar but vanish before verification. Stories of something huge, tentacled, fast, and deliberate, lurking in trenches too deep for sunlight. The creature doesn't just exist in Icelandic sagas anymore, it's global and very possibly real. The kraken is typically described as a giant squid or octopus, scaled up to impossible proportions, tentacles long enough to coil around a ship's hull, eyes like submerged moons, a beak that could split timber. But the details vary depending on who tells the tale. Some say it's smooth skinned, others that it drags barnacles and kelp across its back like a drowned forest. Always, though, it moves with purpose, not like a beast, like a hand. In 1870, a French naval ship off the coast of Chile reported being struck by something beneath the surface. Survivors described enormous limbs wrapping the bow, the sensation of the vessel being pulled instead of pushed. The sea boiled with movement, then it stopped. When they returned to port, the damage was dismissed as coral impact, but the crew told a different story. Their eyes didn't blink as they spoke. More recently, deep sea cameras sent into the Mariana Trench recorded massive, whip like limbs brushing the lens before the feed cut out. The footage was released, then quickly clarified by authorities. Giant squid, they said, a known species, but the scale didn't match, and the movements, too fast, too aware. Some researchers believe the kraken may have a biological basis. Giant squid do exist, after all. Architeuthis ducks, discovered in deep sea videos in the 21st century, prove that monsters do hide in plain abyss. But even those enormous creatures don't explain the legends of ships dragged under, of whirlpools forming out of nowhere, of streams arriving only after something moves beneath the surface. Because that's the real fear, not that the kraken exists, but that it's not alone. That deep below, in the quiet dark, there are more like it, older, bigger, waiting. And what if the kraken isn't the worst thing the sea can offer? What if it's just one soldier in a war we can't see? Because further down, deeper than myth or trench, there's a creature with no end, a coil without closure, a name spoken in ancient texts and feared by prophets. They called it Leviathan. 10. Leviathan. There are monsters, and then there are myths so big they become part of the background noise of existence. The Leviathan is one of those, less a creature, more a cosmic footnote, a reminder that before humans dreamed up the idea of control, the sea had already decided what fear looks like. The Leviathan comes to us from ancient Hebrew texts, where it's described as a massive sea serpent created by God, originally one of a pair, male and female, but only one allowed to live, for fear that their offspring would unmake the world. Even its origin story is an act of divine caution. That alone should tell you something. But this isn't just religious poetry. Versions of the Leviathan seep into Mesopotamian myth, Islamic tradition, Christian theology, and even fragments of Pacific maritime folklore adapted into local tales about world-eating sea dragons. It's the archetype, the prototype of every oversized, unstoppable, ocean-born terror that came after. Descriptions vary, but common threads remain. It coils around continents. Its breath boils the sea. Its scream splits mountains, but it doesn't need to move fast or thrash wildly. It exists at a scale that makes everything else irrelevant. Imagine an eel the length of a tectonic plate. Now imagine it's curious. Leviathan is usually portrayed as an enemy of order, a thing to be battled at the end of time, a chaos beast destined to be slain in an apocalyptic showdown. But some scholars argue that's a later edit, that originally Leviathan wasn't evil, it just was an unkillable, unknowable entity in the deep, whose mere presence reminded us we're temporary. Modern interpretations try to fit it into the usual cryptid box. Maybe it was just a whale, exaggerated over time. Maybe a tectonic myth inspired by undersea earthquakes. But those theories break apart under the weight of the details. You don't get centuries of consistent storytelling across cultures and continents by accident, and you definitely don't get worship without a reason. In some Pacific accounts, fragments, oral retellings, half remembered chants, there are references to a sleeping serpent that girdles the earth deep below the waves. It's not malevolent, it's not benevolent, it's asleep. And the only thing worse than it waking up is us trying to wake it. Think about that. The idea that the ocean has something in reserve, that beneath all the known horrors, there's still a final boss. And we haven't even gotten to the tutorial. If Leviathan is real, it doesn't care about us. That's the part that lands hardest. No battle, no chase, no monstrous roar, just a slow awareness of scale. You're not a threat. You're not a snack, you're just debris. And when the waves shift for no reason and the stars tremble just slightly out of sync with the tide, you'll wonder, is that thunder or a yawn? But if you think Leviathan is the oldest monster we know, you'd be wrong, because in the pages of Greek myth, there's a creature just as vast, just as unknowable, and far more personal. Its name is Cetus. 11. Cetus. Cetus isn't just a monster. It's a punishment, a living retribution sent by the gods when humans step too far, speak too loud, or forget their place. In Greek mythology, Cetus is the sea beast unleashed by Poseidon to destroy coastal cities, or more specifically, to devour the princess Andromeda as punishment for her mother's vanity. That part of the story gets told a lot. The monster is there mostly as a narrative obstacle for a hero to slay, but buried beneath the heroism and divine theatrics is something much more ancient, a fear that the ocean itself can hold a grudge. The name Cetus, from which we get cetacean, the word for whales, was never tied to a single form. Some depict it as a giant fish, others as a hybrid of shark, dragon, or serpentine leviathan. The vagueness is the point. It was less a species than a category, an idea of sea monster so large and terrible that to describe it too clearly would be to tempt it. Cetus appears not just in the tale of Andromeda, but in multiple variations across Mediterranean lore. Each time it represents a different flavor of wrath, and each time it comes from the sea, because the ocean in these stories isn't a setting, it's a character, and it doesn't like to be disrespected. Fast forward to the present, and we still chase its shadow. Sonar readings of unidentifiable creatures off the Aegean coast, divers reporting colossal silhouettes lurking beyond the reach of their lights, faint vibrations rippling across seafloor sensors recorded with no known source. These aren't evidence exactly, but they echo, and that's how myths survive, not through proof, through resonance. Some researchers think the Cetus archetype was inspired by sightings of massive oceanic animals, sperm whales, giant squids, or prehistoric holdovers like the megalodon. Maybe, but again, it's not just the seas, it's the intent. Cetus doesn't merely appear, it arrives with a reason. It's the sea's answer to arrogance, a reminder that we don't get to write all the endings. In the Andromeda myth, the city is punished because her mother dared to boast about her beauty. That's all it took. One loudmouth queen, and a monster was summoned from the depths. That should unsettle you, because today we boast louder than ever. We build farther into the water, drill deeper into the crust, ignore the warnings carved into shorelines by cultures long gone. We call it progress, but the sea might call it provocation. And maybe Cetus is still out there, not prowling, but waiting, a beast without a face, with the authority of gods behind it, not because it hates us, but because someone, somewhere, always breaks the deal.
And if you think facing Cetus is bad, imagine meeting its companion. It doesn't come with a roar, but a scream. It doesn't block your path, it divides it. Her name is Scylla.
12. Scylla. Some creatures stalk you, some chase you. Scylla waits. In the legends of the ancient Greeks, she's one half of a choice no one wants to make, the rock between which all ships must pass. The other half is Charybdis, but we'll get to her. First, let's meet the woman-shaped nightmare clinging to the cliffs. Scylla was once human, they say, or nymph, depending on which version of the myth you read. Either way, she was transformed, cursed really, by jealousy, gods, or perhaps just the sea itself. The stories vary, but the result is always the same. Scylla became a monster of impossible design, a chimera born from betrayal. She is described as having 12 legs like tentacles, 6 long necks, each bearing a head with triple rows of teeth, and a waist ringed with snarling dog heads. She's fused to a jagged rock face, a permanent resident of the Strait of Messina, lurking just opposite Charybdis. Together they formed a natural bottleneck, a gauntlet for sailors. Steer too close to one and the other gets you. But Scylla doesn't need the whole ship. She just wants a few. In Homer's Odyssey, she reaches out from her cliffside crevice and plucks 6 of Odysseus's best men, one for each of her mouths. No fight, no noise, just gone. She doesn't roar or gloat. She devours with indifference. You'd think such a thing would be easy to avoid. Just don't sail near her. But that's the trick. You can't. The channel is narrow, the current's violent, the rocks deceptive. She is positioned precisely where you're most vulnerable, not because she needs to be, because someone put her there. And that idea that Scylla wasn't just born, but placed, makes her something more than monstrous. It makes her a tool. A recurring theme in Pacific and Mediterranean sea myths is that danger often comes packaged as inevitability. You won't escape Scylla. You negotiate with her. You sacrifice. The sea demands payment, and she collects it, one sailor at a time. Some scholars believe Scylla represents the jagged coastal rocks of real-world straits. Others think she's an allegory for unpredictable threat, but her presence has echoed far beyond Greece. There are stories from Polynesian sailors who speak of stone women in cliff faces that snatch birds mid-flight. Legends in the Philippines tell of cliff eaters with snake-like limbs. The motif persists because the fear does, not of monsters, of unavoidable loss. And that's what makes Scylla terrifying. She's not there to kill everyone. She's there to remind you that not everyone makes it. That survival sometimes comes with subtraction. You move forward, lighter, but just across from her, under the same cursed currents, lurks her mirror image, less teeth, more gravity. Scylla grabs, but the next one pulls. Her name is Charybdis. 13. Charybdis, you don't see Charybdis, you feel her. When she breathes, the ocean level drops. When she exhales, ships vanish. In Greek mythology, Charybdis is the whirlpool, an ancient sea entity, cursed to gulp down the tides 3 times a day. Unlike Scylla, who reaches out and takes what she wants, Charybdis doesn't take. She consumes all of it. She's often depicted as a mouth beneath the surface, not a face, not a form, just a void. She's the kind of monster whose horror lies not in her presence, but in her absence, the way the sea suddenly disappears, the way sound drops out, the way panic arrives half a second before your boat starts spinning. Myth says Charybdis was once a daughter of Poseidon, loyal to her father in a war against Zeus. As punishment, Zeus struck her with a thunderbolt and chained her to the seabed, transforming her into a living vortex. That origin feels appropriate. Charybdis isn't just punishment. She's what happens when forces too large for mortals start keeping score. She sits directly across from Scylla in the narrow strait, making passage nearly impossible. If you steer away from one, you move toward the other.
It's the original lose-lose. That's the genius of the myth. You don't conquer Charybdis, you time her. You hope your oars are fast enough, your prayers old enough, your luck unspent. Modern science, of course, can point to real whirlpools, maelstroms, natural eddies, but Charybdis is more than a violent current. She's the fear of what happens when the sea itself becomes unstable, when the foundation moves. In some Pacific folklore, there are echoes of Charybdis in devouring waves, tidal mouths said to open during eclipses or lunar alignments. Some coastal myths claim these watery voids aren't just physical traps, but spiritual ones, that things pulled into the vortex don't just drown, they vanish. Stories from Micronesia speak of voyagers who disappeared in calm weather only for their canoes to wash ashore weeks later. Empty but intact. Mariners talk about rogue waves, about ocean swells that rise from nothing, about the quiet thump of pressure changes in the hull. These aren't proof of Charybdis, but they rhyme with her. She's not flashy, she's not grotesque, she's worse, she's math. She's the physics of despair, the kind of monster that doesn't care what you believe. You can call her a deity or a drainage problem. She'll still pull you under just the same. And in that terrifying neutrality, she shares something with the next entity, a ghost ship, drifting through fog with no crew, no destination, and no mercy. Its sails are full, but there's no wind. They call it the Flying Dutchman.
14. The Flying Dutchman. It's hard to say when the sea first started telling ghost stories, but there's one tale that refuses to sink, one ship that keeps sailing, no matter how many centuries pass. No ports, no crew, just torn sails and glowing mist, and the unshakable feeling that you're looking at a mistake the ocean still hasn't forgiven. The Flying Dutchman isn't a creature exactly, it's a vessel, a phantom, a floating consequence, and it has been spotted, supposedly, in every major ocean, but more and more often in the South Pacific, near storm lines, along deserted trade routes, just where the radar flickers and the air feels like static. The legend's roots are Dutch, as the name suggests. In the most common version, the ship belonged to Captain Hendrik van der Decken, who refused to turn back during a storm off the Cape of Good Hope. He cursed the heavens, mocked divine warnings, and swore he'd round the Cape, even if it took eternity, which is precisely what he got. His ship was damned, forced to sail forever, never docking, never dying, an endless voyage beneath gray skies. But the myth doesn't stay in one place. Like any good sailor's tale, it travels. Variants appear in Polynesian folklore, where ghost canoes drift past reefs in the dead of night, in Maori stories of waka that vanish into mist and never return, in sightings by naval officers from the 18th to 20th centuries, men trained to ignore nonsense, who still reported seeing a ship, glowing red in the distance, vanishing when approached. Some describe it as a full-rigged galleon, sails torn but taut, lights flickering like storm lanterns. Others say it hovers above the waterline. Some say it sails against the wind, and some swear it mirrors your own ship, same size, same shape, until it passes through you like fog and cold metal. The Flying Dutchman doesn't attack. That's what makes it worse. It doesn't do anything. It just shows up. A reminder, a silhouette of punishment for hubris and pride, silently drifting through storms like a courtroom exhibit preserved in salt. Mariners say seeing it is a bad omen, that a sighting means death is coming, usually for the one who spotted it. Some take it a step further. If you see the Dutchman, you're already cursed, not because you're being targeted, but because your path now crosses with something timeless. And nothing timeless leaves you the same. Skeptics explain it as a fata morgana, a complex mirage caused by layers of hot and cold air over the sea. Ships beyond the horizon appear to float or distort, creating the illusion of a ghost vessel. And maybe that's true. Maybe you only see the Dutchman when your mind and the weather are both unraveling. But ask any sailor who's seen it, and they'll tell you the same thing. It didn't look like a ship. It looked like a mistake. And if a ship can be cursed, anchored forever to the sins of its captain, what else might be roaming the waves with an unfinished story? How about a creature that's never needed a ship at all, a beast straight from myth, half stallion, half fish, cresting through the spray like something Poseidon left behind? Its name is Hippocampus. 15. Hippocampus. Imagine you're at sea, dawn just breaking. The waves are quiet. Then a shape cuts through the water. Not a dolphin, not a whale, but something impossible. The front half is a horse galloping through the surf as if it were air. The back half, a coiled tail of green-scaled muscle slicing through waves like a scythe. You've just seen a hippocampus, and if you believe the myths, it saw you first. In Greek mythology, the hippocampus was a creature of the deep, part equine, part fish, often pulling the chariots of sea gods like Poseidon. Regal, swift, and strong, it wasn't a monster in the traditional sense, more like an aquatic steed, a noble beast born of salt and myth. But that was the civilized version, painted on vases, carved into stone, retold in polite epics. Out on the open sea, far from marble columns and decorative mosaics, the creature takes on a stranger shape. There are whispers from Pacific Island traditions, though not by the name hippocampus, that describe wave runners, sea beasts with manes of foam and tails like eels. They chase boats not to harm, but to race, to test, to remind mortals that speed does not equal mastery. Some tales say that if one passes beneath your canoe, you'll reach land safely. Others say it means you've caught the eye of something older than maps. In Roman lore, they were symbols of power and protection, guides for those crossing uncertain seas. But there's something about the hybrid form that sticks in the brain long after the symbolism wears off. Why would a fish look like a horse? Why not something more aquatic? Maybe it's because the ocean doesn't care about categories. Maybe it's a hint that even in the depths, there's no escaping the familiar. That the horse, a symbol of conquest, freedom, and flight, has a reflection in the waves. One that can't be tamed, one that swims in reverse. Modern sightings, few but not absent. Sailors and divers have reported seeing large, finned shapes breaching in open waters, manes streaming behind like seaweed. Most are written off as dolphins, misidentified sharks, or the classic light playing tricks. But light doesn't gallop. It doesn't make wave wakes in the shape of hoofbeats. There's even a theory, mostly whispered among fringe marine biologists, that the hippocampus myth might have grown from sightings of enormous seahorses, real ones, mutated in deep sea trenches, creatures that evolved strange traits in pressure zones we still haven't mapped, creatures that come up just long enough to remind us we don't belong here. And that's the truth behind the hippocampus. It's not terrifying because it's violent. It's terrifying because it shouldn't be real, and yet it feels like it is. It breaches the surface of reason, swims a tight circle around belief, then vanishes without asking permission. But the sea doesn't stop at beauty. For every majestic steed in the surf, there's
Something more ancient waiting below. Crocodilian jaws, elephantine bulk, scaled divine chaos. Its name is Makara. 16. Makara. At first glance, Makara seems almost friendly. In Hindu and Buddhist iconography, it appears on temple arches, sculpted onto the mouths of spouts and doorways, or pulling chariots of river gods. Its form shifts, a crocodile here, an elephant seal there, sometimes with the trunk of a beast and the tail of a fish, or the jaws of a jaguar and the scales of a shark. It's a composite animal, built like a mythological ransom note, But look closer, and that familiarity starts to fracture. Makara isn't just a decorative water creature, it's the gatekeeper of thresholds, especially the dangerous kind: rivers to oceans, civilization to chaos, life to whatever comes after. It's a transition beast. One foot in the known world, the other somewhere the cartographers stopped drawing. In Indian mythology, Makara serves as the Vahana, the mount for Ganga, the river goddess, and Varuna, the god of oceans. And that sounds noble until you realize that being a divine mount doesn't mean it's tame. It means it's ancient, powerful, possibly older than the gods it carries. You don't ride a Makara, you bargain with it. Some scholars argue that Makara is a symbolic amalgam of water's duality: life giving and destructive, serene and catastrophic. Its crocodile head represents surface danger, its aquatic tail, the hidden depths. But in Pacific adjacent folklore, especially across Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean, Makara doesn't stay locked in metaphor. It drifts, it migrates. You find hints of it in Sri Lankan sea dragon myths, Indonesian Naga Laut, even some Polynesian carvings that seem to depict a Makara like hybrid peering out from temple eaves. And where the imagery drifts, the stories follow. In certain atolls, there are whispered tales of the guardian under the reef, a beast with tusks and scales that coils in underwater caves, striking only when offerings go unmade. A few times each generation, a canoe goes missing near a sacred bend, and the elders say the Makara is hungry again, not angry, not cruel, just keeping the balance. It's always about balance. Divers off the coast of Malaysia once reported a strange sonar return, a mass the size of a humpback whale, but with a bizarre irregularity in shape: elongated head, protrusions along the spine, tail that curled instead of fluked. The data was dismissed as glitchy. The divers refused to go back. What makes the Makara terrifying isn't just its hybrid nature, it's what that hybrid represents: not chaos, but convergence. The idea that beneath the ocean, things don't stay in their boxes, that the sea splices together what it wants, combining the fiercest parts of its creatures into something the surface world can't classify. And if something that hybrid exists, what else does? What other stitched together mistakes or experiments lie curled beneath the thermocline, waiting to rise? Because the Makara may guard the gate, but something is always trying to
Come through. Something bigger, older, hungrier, something with 7 heads. Its name is Loten, 17. Loten in the dry, blistering heat of ancient Canaanite myth. Loten slithers through salt water like a divine nerve, coiled, writhing, and deeply cosmically wrong. He's not a sea monster in the way we think of them today. He's an event, a manifestation of chaos itself, delivered in the form of a 7 headed sea serpent that exists solely to be destroyed, and yet somehow never stays gone. According to ancient Ugaritic texts, Loten, also called Leitan or Litanu, was the primordial chaos serpent defeated by the storm god Baal. The myth has a familiar structure: order versus chaos, sky versus sea, hero versus beast. You see echoes of it everywhere. In the Hebrew Bible, Lotan becomes Leviathan. In Mesopotamian myth, he echoes Tiamat, but here in his oldest telling, Lotan is the unmaking of structure: 7 heads, each capable of destruction, and a body as long as a river. Why seven? Symbolism mostly, but also practicality. You can't cut off one head and win. You have to do it 7 times. You have to fight chaos again and again and pretend that it won't come back. The story says Baal slays Lotan with twin thunderbolts, casting the beast into the depths. But fragments of the myth suggest something more ambiguous. Did Baal destroy the serpent or just wound it? Was Lotan bound, buried, scattered, or simply waiting? Somewhere between Syria's coast and the imagined edge of the world, Lotan was said to be imprisoned beneath the ocean floor, not dead, dormant, which leads to a modern thought experiment.
What if that's not metaphor? What if something like Loten lies folded in a trench, coiled so tightly that sonar mistakes it for a seafloor ridge? There's a reason seven-headed serpents show up again and again, across cultures, across eras. They're not efficient predators. They're symbols of endurance, of problems you can't kill once. You slay one head, and six more remain. You survive one encounter, and chaos still surrounds you. In some Pacific oral traditions, though not named as Lotan, there are mentions of multi headed water snakes that span entire island chains. They sleep beneath the sea and rise only when the balance between land and sea is disrupted. Earthquakes, eruptions, sudden floods. The snake wakes, not in fury, but necessity. A Japanese expedition once recorded seismic patterns off the Mariana Trench that seemed rhythmic, not tectonic, but breathing. It didn't match any known volcanic structure. The data was quietly shelved, and so Lotan lingers, not as a beast to battle, but as a concept. Chaos, lurking, boundaries blurred, order fraying, and if the gods only manage to suppress him, not destroy him, then it's only a matter of time before something shifts. And when it does, you won't get a roar. You'll get a silence that stretches across oceans, followed by the impossible shape of something writhing toward the surface, crowned in salt, crowned in teeth. But even Lotan had a source, a mother.
Of monsters, a saltwater origin carved into clay tablets older than language itself. They called her Tiamat.
18. Tiamat, before the sea had tides, before storms had names, and before anything crawled or walked or built or burned, there was Tiamat, not a creature in the usual sense, not even a god by today's standards. Tiamat is origin. She is the beginning of saltwater chaos, the primordial mother of monsters, the salt sea that bore the sky and regretted it. In Babylonian myth, Tiamat existed before the world began. She mated with the freshwater god Apsu, and from their union, the first gods emerged. But creation is messy. These offspring grew noisy and arrogant, upsetting Apsu, who plotted to destroy them. When Tiamat found out, she didn't intervene gently. She transformed into a massive, serpentine, dragon like sea goddess, the original sea monster. Her body was chaos itself, her scales covered in the languages of storms, her blood the brine that swallowed the innocent and the guilty, guilty in equal measure. When her children killed Apsu to protect themselves, Tiamat didn't weep. She declared war. She birthed a legion of monsters, serpents, scorpion men, chaos dragons, and crowned a general among them, Kingu, giving him the tablet of destinies to lead her armies. It took the storm god Marduk, armed with divine weapons and the weight of fate, to face her. He trapped her in a net, filled her belly with wind, and split her in half. Her death birthed the sky and the sea. Her body became the foundation of the cosmos. Her limbs mapped into rivers, her ribs into mountains. That's the official story. But here's the question that myths like this don't want you to ask. If the world was built from her, how can she truly be gone? In some interpretations, Tiamat isn't killed, just transformed. She became the ocean, still present, still watching. And if she was once a being who birthed dragons and swallowed gods, then what exactly is she capable of now? Think about that the next time a wave breaks harder than expected, when a trench opens deeper than your models predicted, when something stirs in the Mariana or the Tonga Kermadec that doesn't match tectonic activity or undersea volcanoes, because the ocean is still a mystery. And if that mystery has a name, it might be hers. Tiamat's tale isn't just a Mesopotamian creation story, it's a warning wrapped in allegory that from chaos comes creation, and from creation, eventually, betrayal. Her children turned on her. Her body became the framework of the world, and still we wonder why the sea seems restless. Some Pacific Islanders speak of the ocean as an old woman, wrathful, tired, full of memory, a force not to be angered or overused. That might be Tiamat, reinterpreted and renamed. The echoes are uncanny. There's always a maternal sea, always betrayed, always biding her time. And there's something modern too. Satellite images picking up whirlpool patterns that don't conform to any weather system. Anomalous eddies, they're called, sometimes hundreds of miles across, rotating.
Without cause. When investigated, they seem empty. No fish, no debris, no explanation. Somewhere in one of those spirals, something might be watching. Not a creature, not a ship, a mind, a memory, something so old that the shape of the planet itself was its last breath. Tiamat doesn't roar. She waits because everything you fear in the ocean, storms, serpents, sinkholes, the dark, came from her. She doesn't need to rise. She's already everywhere. But if you're still clinging to the idea of monsters being limited to mythology, you might want to reconsider, because even the sea has its cliches. The serpent, the dragon, the undulating ridge of spine breaking the surface, only to vanish again into the fog. And just because it has no name doesn't mean it isn't real. They call it sea serpent or sea dragon, and it might be more than one. 19. Sea serpent or sea dragon, various. They go by many names, long, sinuous shadows slipping through the fog, breaking the surface in a ripple of coils and spines. They stretch across mythologies like their bodies stretch across oceans. Sea serpents, sea dragons, call them what you like. They're not defined by taxonomy. They're defined by what they aren't. Whales, sharks, dolphins, submarines, everything else is on the table, and the sightings are relentless. From the Pacific coasts of Asia to the western shores of the Americas, people report the same thing, something long, undulating, sometimes with fins or a mane, sometimes with the horned head of a dragon, sometimes just a sleek black shape, slicing through the water with the dispassionate grace of a predator that's forgotten why it hunts. In Norse legend, it's Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, so vast it encircles the world. In Japan, it's the Ryujin, a dragon god of the sea, ruler of the ocean's power. In Hawaiian mythology, there are mo'o, giant lizard-like water spirits, slithering through rainforests and ocean caves alike. In British Columbia, they call it Naitaka, or the Ogopogo. In China, sea dragons ride storms like horses. In Chile, it's Culebron, same creature, different mask. So what are they? Well, here's what they're not. They're not easily explained away. Skeptics point to oarfish, giant eels, misidentified whales, optical illusions caused by waves and shadows. And yes, those things happen, but the scale of the reports, their uncanny consistency over centuries and continents, suggests something more. They all seem to agree on the shape, the length, the movement, a sort of impossible undulation that defies physics as we know it. In 1848, the crew of HMS Daedalus reported seeing a creature at least 60 feet long in the South Atlantic, with a head like that of a snake, moving with purpose just under the surface. It was a British warship, not a rumor mill, not a fisherman's bar tale. The report was logged officially, then buried in polite dismissal. In more recent times, satellite footage occasionally catches anomalous wakes, strange linear patterns in open water with no visible source. They last seconds. Sometimes they're seen near deep ocean fault lines as if something is surfacing, stretching maybe, before retreating. Marine biologists roll their eyes. Large squid, they say, swimming formation of fish. But even the most seasoned oceanographers admit we've explored less than 10% of the seafloor. That's not ignorance, that's statistical darkness. Here's the scarier possibility. Sea serpents aren't anomalies, they're adaptations, predators built for the ocean's unlit hallways, built not to be seen until they choose to be. And when they do, when they breach, twist, and vanish in the same breath, you're not left with answers. You're left with doubt. with questions you didn't know to ask. And the sea loves questions, especially the ones that echo. And sometimes when those shadows rise too close to the surface, they don't just mimic land, they become it, because some monsters don't hide, some let you build on them. They call it the island whale. 20. Island whale, island monster. You've been sailing for days, no land, no signal, just horizon in every direction. Then suddenly there it is, salvation, a lush island rising out of the mist, covered in mossy rocks, palms bent like bowed heads, seabirds circling overhead. Your crew cheers, you anchor, you wade ashore, you collapse onto warm, spongy ground that smells of brine and life. And then the island breathes. It's one of the oldest sea myths we have, older than charts, older than gods, older than fear itself. The island whale appears across centuries and continents under different names: Fastatokalon, Aspidokaloni, Jafur, Narwhal Island, Paikea. But the story is always the same: the island that isn't, the sanctuary that waits just long enough for you to trust it before it disappears beneath the waves. In the Pacific, legends speak of ancient voyaging canoes finding refuge on unmapped land, only for the earth beneath their feet to groan, shudder, and sink. One tale from Polynesia tells of an island where trees grew upside down and the soil was soft as flesh. The explorers didn't recognize the signs until the tide rolled in, uphill. They never made it back. Unlike other sea creatures that chase or devour, the island whale doesn't need to move. You come to it, and perhaps that's what makes it the most terrifying of all. It preys on human need, thirst, exhaustion, the unshakable urge to believe that safety still exists somewhere in the ocean's vast, uncaring theater. In some medieval bestiaries, the island whale is described in grotesque detail, a creature so large that moss and trees grow on its back, with a hide textured like volcanic rock and breath that poisons the air. Sailors light fires on its surface to cook their meals and only realize their mistake when the island begins to sink. Not fast, not with violence, just a slow, inevitable submergence, as though the ocean itself has decided you've overstayed your welcome. Modern science has offered polite scoffs at this tale. There are no marine animals large enough to support an ecosystem. True by today's standards, but what if the standard is wrong? The ocean has produced giants before: blue whales, colossal squid, prehistoric leviathans that left bite marks on megalodon bones. Why not a creature that evolved not just to survive, but to disappear into geography? Think about this. Vast areas of the Pacific remain uncharted. Entire seamounts have only recently been discovered via satellite altimetry. Anomalies appear and vanish from sonar with no clear source. One theory posits a type of deep-sea organism that remains motionless for decades, perhaps centuries before surfacing, either to feed or to migrate, a living reef, a breathing island. There's even an unsettling trend among satellite data analysts: small uncharted landmasses that appear in the South Pacific for a few days, then vanish. Geologic activity, icebergs, cartographic error? Possibly. But the birds circling overhead, how do they always seem to find these places? Maybe it's not just one creature. Maybe the island whale is a species, or a category, a classification we haven't made yet, a life form that mimics land for self-defense, or worse, for bait, a siren, not of sound, but of terrain. And here's the truly awful thought: what if you have stepped on one before? What if you made camp, built shelter, felt solid ground beneath your feet, and never knew it shifted just slightly beneath you because it let you go that time? But the next time you see a perfect little island in the middle of nowhere, be cautious, especially if the seagulls are circling but never landing. And if you do land, listen, really listen. Does the ground pulse? And if you think that's unsettling, just wait until the land talks back. Because some things under the sea don't hide at all. They flirt, they sing, they draw you in with stories of love and salt and laughter. They look like us almost. They are sea nymphs, mermaids, and mermen. 21. Sea nymphs, while mermaids, while mermen. They are beautiful, and that's the first problem. The ocean doesn't offer beauty without agenda. So when something rises from the deep with skin like polished pearl, eyes like stormlight, and a smile too wide for its face, your first instinct should not be awe. It should be suspicion. The legends of mermaids, mermen, and sea nymphs exist in nearly every culture with a coastline. Pacific Island myths are no exception. Hawaiian tales tell of mu'uwahine, aquatic lizard women with human form and divine blood. The Maori speak of marakihau, sea spirits with tubular tongues and hollow chests. In Micronesia, there are tales of water people who dwell in lagoons, stealing breath, trading secrets for memories. Not all of them are malicious, but none are harmless. Mermaids, in most traditions, are not the friendly fork-collecting princesses we've sanitized into folklore. They're shapeshifters. Ambiguous, they offer safety, then confusion, then tragedy. Some save sailors from drowning, only to keep them locked in coral halls below the sea. Others lure ships to rocks with their singing, or seduce fishermen into forgetting the surface world entirely. In Pacific lore, the ocean is populated with many such beings. Some appear only to children, others surface during specific moon phases. One recurring theme: these creatures know things, ancient things, forbidden things. They're not just watchers of the deep, they are its memory, its whispers. They remember what the land forgot. A disturbing number of real-world sailors have recorded sightings of half-human figures in the water long before the Disneyfication of merfolk. Explorers, traders, whalers, and even submarine crews have reported seeing humanoid shapes in the distance only to have them vanish with a splash, or worse, to surface closer than expected, blinking calmly as if curious, as if waiting. Science predictably blames manatees, dugongs, misidentified seals, exhaustion, hallucination. But even those explanations raise new questions. Why do so many unrelated cultures describe the same things? Fish-tailed people, singing voices, underwater civilizations. There's a theory that persists in some Polynesian storytelling circles, that the merfolk aren't sea creatures at all, but exiles, humans changed by the ocean for their disobedience or pride, or maybe they're what humans were before land. Evolution in reverse, a forked path that didn't end, a sibling species that never needed legs. And maybe that's why they call to us, because we remember them, somewhere in the salt of our blood, the same way we remember the sound of waves before we learn to walk away from them. The fear with merfolk isn't violence, it's invitation, the slow seduction of forgetting, of slipping under the surface just for a moment, then forgetting why you ever left. So if you're ever drifting and you hear a voice beneath the boat, a song, a name, a lullaby, only you recognize, don't lean in, don't answer. Because it's not really you they want, it's your anchor. And if you do answer and survive, you may find yourself stranded on a different kind of myth, one that sings less and screams more, because not all lures are melodic. Some are sharp. They're called sirens. 22. Sirens, they never scream. That's the worst part. Sirens sing softly, sweetly, as if the ocean finally learned your name and decided to sing it back to you. In Greek mythology, sirens were never simple. Part woman, part bird, or later part fish, they were said to live on rocky islands, luring sailors to their deaths with songs that promised everything you didn't know you were missing. The sirens didn't ask for you. They let you come to them. And by the time you realized the melody wasn't a blessing, it was a bait. The rocks had already shattered your hull. That's the part they never really changed across time or oceans. The method stays the same. not claws, not teeth, just the unbearable temptation of a better truth. In the classical world, sirens were agents of fate, instruments of divine punishment. In Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus orders his men to plug their ears with wax and tie him to the mast so he can hear the sirens without steering toward them. Even back then, it wasn't about danger, it was about curiosity, the need to hear what they had to say, the belief, deep, irrational, human, that maybe the song was meant just for you. Now take that concept and drop it into the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Islanders have their own versions. In parts of Melanesia and Polynesia, tales circulate about the singing reef or the voice below the tide. These aren't metaphorical. Fishermen describe hearing music, high, soft, and almost familiar, just before the currents change, just before the engine dies, just before the boat begins to spin. In parts of Papua New Guinea, siren-like entities are said to live in limestone sea caves, only being when the moon is exactly half. In Hawaiian tradition, certain chants are not to be spoken near water after dark because they may be answered. In Tuvaluan folklore, there are stories of women who walk into the sea during storms and sing to their missing brothers, and of something that sings back in their voices. What unites all of these is the unsettling suggestion that the siren's voice doesn't come from itself, it comes from you. The song you hear is personalized, a sonic mirrors, a soft echo of whatever it is you most regret or long for or miss, and science as usual has its rational hat on. Some marine biologists suggest these sounds are subharmonics, deep-sea frequencies caused by shifting tectonic plates, undersea landslides, or mating calls of unknown species. These events produce vibrations that are then distorted by water density and temperature, creating auditory illusions. That's a lot of words to say. Nobody knows. What's more concerning is how often these sounds are followed by disappearances. Small boats, solo divers, signal drops, unexplained GPS loops, SAR missions that recover the vessel but not the person. And when they check the boat's radio logs or black box recordings, there's sometimes just static or music, warped and slowed, a half melody, a fragment, like a lullaby sung underwater. Sirens don't need to be real in the biological sense. They just need to work. And they do, because people still lean over the edge of their boats when they hear something strange, still tilt their heads, still whisper, "What was that?" into dark water, still believe, somehow stupidly, selfishly, that maybe it's for me, and maybe it is. Maybe that's why you'll never hear someone scream about a siren, only sing. But even songs wear masks. Some things don't sing at all. Some just watch. And when they watch, they remember. They carry the weight of forgotten tragedies, drownings, vanishings, silent falls into black water. They are not sirens. They are rusalka. And they don't ask for you. They blame you. 23. Rusalka, water spirits, they don't rise with the tide. They rise with memory, where sirens tempt, Rusalki accuse. These aren't creatures of myth as much as they are revenants, echoes of something that went wrong beneath the surface. You'll hear them described in old Slavic folklore as the spirits of drowned women, not simply victims of tragedy, but those whose lives ended unjustly, forgotten, unclaimed, unresolved. They linger in rivers and lakes, hair trailing behind them like weeping kelp, eyes open far too wide, not seeking rescue, but retribution. But the thing about water legends, they drift. And like so many old world myths, the Rusalka didn't stop at the borders of Europe. She slipped into boats, migrated in stories, took root in new currents, and somewhere along the Pacific Rim, she found new forms and familiar waters. You can find versions of her in the remote corners of the Philippines, where she's known as a Serena's ghost sister, not seductive like her sibling, but hollow-eyed and silent, appearing near mangroves just before a storm hits. In Pacific Island cultures, similar figures appear in lagoon legends, sometimes referred to as sea brides or weeping swimmers, often appearing at dusk, just when the air goes cold without warning and the sea loses its color. In Japan, she echoes through the funayuri, restless spirits of those who died at sea, who appear at the edges of boats, hands pale and grasping, asking for ladles so they can sink the vessel, one scoop at a time. In Hawaii, there are stories of Obake of the waves, shapeless sea ghosts who float beneath surfers, imitating their movements, waiting for one misstep. Call them what you will. They're all part of the same unspoken category, unforgiven water spirits. But the Rusalka stands out for one reason. She looks like someone you used to know. That's part of her weapon. She doesn't roar or wail. She waits, stands knee-deep in the water, arms gently swaying, hair floating like ink in milk. To see her is to remember something you tried to forget, the time you didn't answer the call, the time you turned your back on someone in need, the time you walked away from the edge while someone else slipped under it. Folklore says Rusalki come ashore during the spring rains, the season of flooding, of rising tides, of soft soil giving way. That's when memory is most fragile. That's when the veil between past and present starts to thin, like mist on the water. They're said to gather near willow trees, near ruined bridges, near places where something once connected but doesn't anymore. And in more modern accounts, they don't just haunt rivers, they move in currents. They spread across currents like oil. A marine researcher near Vladivostok once reported seeing a figure floating miles offshore, upright, not struggling, simply watching the research vessel as it passed. They returned to the same spot a week later, found-nothing, but their onboard temperature sensors kept spiking, briefly, every hour at the same mark. There's even a story from a Pacific Fisheries Patrol captain who swore he heard someone calling his name, his actual name, from the water during a night run. He turned, saw nothing, but the engine stalled moments later. When they restarted, the depth finder showed an anomaly beneath them, a solid mass the shape and size of a human just hovering 10 meters down. The ship's black box recorded static during the stall, but beneath the static, if you slow it down, there's a sound like a woman humming. No language, no lyrics, just breath in water. Skeptics, as always, have explanations. Cold water hallucinations, sonar misreadings, pareidolia, audio artifacts. But the people who live by the sea, they know better. They say never speak the names of the drowned aloud. Never whistle on deck at night. Never throw flowers into the ocean without tying them to a stone. The sea, after all, keeps its dead. But Rusalki, they don't stay kept. They rise not for blood, but for acknowledgement. They demand to be seen. And in their most terrifying form, they look like the cost of forgetting. Because for all our myths of monsters, sometimes it's not the unknown that haunts us, it's what we left behind. And if the Rusalka is the memory of the ocean, then what happens when that memory becomes something bigger than death, something that existed before us, something not myth, but madness? That's where things go from uncanny to cosmic. That's when you meet Cthulhu. 24. Cthulhu. Great old ones. There are legends that come with teeth. Others come with scales. But Cthulhu comes with silence, not the quiet kind, not the peaceful, drifting on the waves sort of hush. No, this silence is thick, weighted, like the air just before a tsunami, or the moment before something enormous breaches the surface and the water holds its breath. Cthulhu wasn't born in a fishing village. He doesn't come from oral traditions passed down around firelight. He doesn't belong to a culture or a coast or a tribe. He came from paper, ink, madness. First introduced by H.P. Lovecraft in 1928 in The Call of Cthulhu, this creature wasn't written as a cryptid or sea serpent or ghost ship. He was never meant to be understood. Cthulhu was a thought experiment in terror, a cosmic being so ancient and vast that simply knowing about him could erode the boundaries of your sanity. But myths evolve. What began as fiction became folklore, and what began as metaphor became something else, something slippery, because the more the world stared into the sea, the more it began to look like the sea was staring back. According to Lovecraft's mythos, Cthulhu sleeps beneath the Pacific Ocean in the drowned city of Urlier, a sunken metropolis of non-Euclidean geometry where the angles don't add up and the walls lean in ways that break the brain. He is described as part octopus, part dragon, part human, with massive wings and a face covered in tentacles, but these are only shapes, vessels. Cthulhu isn't really a thing. He is the suggestion of something beyond thingness. And somehow, over time, his story migrated. People began to report anomalies, bizarre seismic activity in the South Pacific, unexplained marine animal behavior near certain underwater ridges, and most famously, the now infamous sound detected in 1997 by NOAA's hydrophones. It was called the bloop, a low-frequency, ultra-powerful underwater sound that echoed across nearly 3,000 miles of ocean. At the time, it was the loudest underwater noise ever recorded that wasn't volcanic or man-made. It came from near the exact coordinates Lovecraft described as the location of Arlaia, just west of the southern tip of South America, deep in the Pacific. Coincidence? Maybe, probably, until you look deeper. Since the bloop, other unexplained oceanic signals have been recorded: slowdowns, upsweeps, Julia, train-like rumbles, all lacking clear sources, all originating from regions we can't access without risking human lives. What if the fiction simply matched the frequency of something real? There are modern sailor, deep-sea divers, and submersible pilots who refuse to go near certain coordinates, places where the pressure seems off or the sound returns don't match any known terrain. Some describe dreams after sailing those waters, recurring ones, towering green-lit spires, shadows too large for comprehension, a whisper not in any known language, but one they understood.
Anyway, and here's the thing about Cthulhu that makes him uniquely terrifying compared to every other entry on this list. He doesn't need to attack. He doesn't need to chase you through the trenches or wrap his limbs around your hull. His danger is epistemological, psychological. He destabilizes reality by being known. In the stories, just reading about Cthulhu brings madness. Even saying his name too often becomes a kind of psychic erosion, not because of a curse, but because your brain isn't meant to contain what he is. He doesn't threaten your life, he threatens your context, and yet the myth keeps growing. Cthulhu has seeped into pop culture, science fiction, and internet legend. You'll find his name carved into deep-sea horror games, stitched into memes, referenced in oceanic conspiracy forums, and amateur hydrophone circles. Some treat him as fiction, others aren't so sure. There's a quiet belief, especially among fringe marine biologists and Lovecraftian devotees, that Cthulhu may be our mythic shorthand for something we've already encountered. Maybe not a tentacled god sleeping in a geometric nightmare, but a truth we keep trying to ignore. The ocean is bigger than us, smarter than us, older than us, and almost certainly less empty than we pretend. Cthulhu isn't proof of the unknown. He's proof that we shouldn't have asked. And if he is sleeping, as the stories say, then what happens when we build one sonar ping too many, drill one trench too deep, drop one probe too far? What happens when the sea decides to open its eyes? Or worse, when it already has? But if cosmic dread isn't enough to unnerve you, let's shift back into something more solid, less conceptual, more scaly. A giant red monster with a temper and the body of a snake and a sea mine had a baby. You probably know him. He's the Red Bluster.
25. The Red Bluster. He doesn't come from ancient myth. He wasn't whispered into being by firelight or etched onto the walls of crumbling temples. The Red Bluster
was born in the age of streaming algorithms and high definition spectacle, a cinematic sea beast from the 2022 animated Netflix film, The Sea Beast. But make no mistake, fiction or not, there's something about the red bluster that resonates too deeply to be ignored. In the film, he's portrayed as a massive, vibrant red leviathan, a misunderstood titan hunted by humanity, but ultimately revealed to be a creature of intelligence, dignity, and mystery. He isn't a villain, he's a victim of centuries of propaganda, a scapegoat made of muscle and myth. But here's where it gets strange. The idea of the red bluster, this enormous semi serpentine, semi dinosaur sea monster, has roots that go deeper than the screen. Because long before pixels gave him shape, people were already seeing something like him. Across the Pacific, coastal communities have reported encounters with inexplicable sea creatures far too large to be whales, moving too fast to be serpents, and rising too high to be waves. In Indonesia, the ular laut merah, Red Sea snake, is whispered about by fishermen who claim to have seen a bright crimson ridge undulating just beneath the waves during storm. In Chile, stories persist about a dragon del sur, a sea dragon sighted off the Patagonian coast, glowing red beneath moonlight and vanishing the moment someone reaches for a camera. In the lore of Papua New Guinea, there's mention of the fireback, a massive aquatic creature said to shimmer with red and orange scales, whose presence coincides with strange shifts in tides and the disappearance of fish. It doesn't attack, it displaces. A sovereign beast that moves entire ecosystems just by existing. Why red? It's a strange choice for a sea creature, counterintuitive even. Most large aquatic animals are dark, blue, or gray to blend in, but red, particularly in the deeper ocean, becomes invisible. The deeper you go, the more red light disappears, making a crimson body functionally invisible in the abyss. So maybe the red bluster's most fictional trait is also its most plausible. Now let's take a step back. What does it mean when a fictional creature captures public imagination so completely? It means it touched something real, something archetypal. The red bluster is part of a long line of misunderstood giants, from Moby Dick to Godzilla to Cloverfield, monsters that reflect our fear, not of evil, but of misunderstanding, of waking something ancient and powerful and realizing it was never the threat. And if stories like that keep coming back, it might be because we know deep down that we've misunderstood the ocean too, that beneath our floating cities and sonar maps, there may still be something enormous, something intelligent, something just watching us with the patience of something that doesn't need to fight. Because maybe the red bluster is not a beast of war, maybe he's a test of how we respond to something stronger than us, of what we do when the thing we've called a monster for centuries finally rises, not to destroy us, but to ask us why we tried. That might be what haunts us most, the idea that the creature we feared might be better than us. And if the red bluster is fiction, perhaps he's the kind that predicts truth, the kind of fiction that doesn't warn but remembers. But not all sea monsters are gentle giants hiding in plain sight. Some are rage in scale form, weapons with too many heads and not enough reasons. And when you talk about multi headed terror rising from the depths, ripping through tides and logic, you're talking about Hydra.
26. Hydra, C variant. There's a reason we use the Hydra as a metaphor for problems that multiply when attacked, because that's exactly what it was built for. The Hydra, in its classical form, is a creature born to be indestructible, not because of armor, but because of logic. You cut off one head and two grow back in its place, cause and effect, action and consequence, an endless recursion of punishment. But while the Hydra we know best comes from Greek mythology, most famously the Lernaean Hydra, Slain by Heracles in one of his labors, its roots stretch far deeper and its limbs reach far wider, especially across the waters of the Pacific. There are sea variant myths, less famous but arguably more disturbing, that describe multi-headed sea serpents with regenerative abilities, not invincible in a cinematic superhero sense, but persistently survivable. These creatures aren't easily killed. They return, they adapt, they break apart and become more. Let's rewind a bit. In the original myths, the Hydra lurked in the swamps of Lerna, poisonous breath, venomous blood, countless heads, but in oceanic versions from Southeast Asia, Melanesia, and even parts of Polynesia, there are whispers of sea snakes that fracture when struck, duplicating and spreading like cancer. Fishermen describe slicing through the tail of a massive eel-like predator, only to find two more slithering in its place the next day. No one calls it Hydra, but the concept rhymes. There are also chants from certain Pacific islanders, now nearly lost, that describe the sea with many eyes. Not a god, not a demon, but a living current that watches from multiple heads, each one aware of the other, yet acting independently. Ships reported seeing shapes circling from opposite directions, timed too perfectly to be coincidence, as if one mind was coordinating multiple bodies. Sound familiar? The idea of a hydra in the sea isn't just plausible. It's probable if you step back from myth and think biologically. Colonial sea monsters may sound outlandish, but marine creatures have always been shape-shifting puzzles. There are jellyfish that regenerate from fragments, starfish that regrow limbs, worms that split themselves and double. Why not a predator designed to expand when attacked? In modern times, the Hydra myth gets dusted off every few years whenever strange sonar anomalies emerge. One naval report from the 1980s described tracking a pod of serpentine objects that moved in synchronized but opposite directions, each registering similar thermal signatures. The suggestion, not a pod, but one creature, multi-bodied, connected somehow. Biologists, as always, chalk it up to swimming patterns, migratory confusion, or glitchy sonar. But then again, when a creature can simulate its own destruction and come back stronger, why wouldn't it confuse you? And let's not forget the psychological layer of the Hydra. Its horror lies not just in its regenerative body, but in its refusal to end. No victory, no conclusion, just escalation, an ever-growing tangle of consequences. Sound familiar? Because this isn't just a myth about sea creatures. It's a story about futility, about trying to control something that was designed to survive your worst efforts. And that might be the part that matters most, that some sea creatures don't just live in the water, they learn from it. They reflect its endlessness, its fluidity, its ability to endure damage and keep moving. And when you fight something like that, you're not just risking your ship, you're feeding it. So if you ever see a long, dark shape break the surface in the distance, followed by another and another, and they all look like the same thing, you'd better ask yourself a question. Are you surrounded by many creatures or by one? And if that one splits when you strike it, what do you do then? You stop, because the next creature doesn't split. It waits, still, ancient, with arms too long and a mind too old, a spirit with no name, only form. It's time you met the sea demons of Polynesian lore. 27. Sea demon, octopus spirits, Polynesian lore. If the Hydra is terror in multiplicity, then what comes next is terror in stillness. The kind that doesn't scream or chase or roar, but simply extends an arm in your direction and waits and waits and waits, long after you've forgotten it's even there. Polynesian mythology is filled with gods of wind, stone, fire, and ocean, but below those gods, buried in reef shadows and trench walls, there are older beings, ones not worshipped, but respected, feared, avoided. The sea demons, especially those that take the form of octopus spirits, are not just creatures, they're warnings. They're known by many names across the Pacific: Kanaloa, Rogo, Te Weke Muturangi, and others. Some are divine, some monstrous, some both. In Hawaii, Kanaloa is often considered a god of the sea, a companion to Cain, the creator, but in older traditions, his symbol is the octopus, a creature associated not with creation, but with the unknown, the deep, the things that don't die, but don't surface either. Octopus spirits in Polynesian stories are not tentacled cartoon beasts. They are vast, calculating intelligences, tricksters, guardians of forbidden places, or occasionally destroyers. And while some modern tellings romanticize them, the old chants and carvings are clear. These beings were never to be approached, let alone angered. One of the most enduring myths is the tale of Te Heki Muturangi, a massive octopus said to have been hunted across the ocean by the hero Kupi, the legendary Polynesian navigator credited with discovering New Zealand. According to the story, Kupe chased this sea demon from Raiatea across the Pacific, finally cornering it near the coast of Aotearoa. The creature was said to be cunning, fast, and aware, not an animal, but an adversary. That story isn't just a monster hunt. It's a metaphor for navigating the Pacific itself, charting the unchartable, but even metaphors leave shadows. And in certain currents, sailors and divers still report odd encounters, large, slow-moving masses below their vessels, just outside sonar range. Pressure drops, suction sounds without cause, and worse, the feeling of being observed, not by something hungry, but by something that's seen it all before. There's a kind of mathematical horror to these octopus spirits. They're too efficient, too silent. Real octopuses, after all, can solve puzzles, open jars, use tools, escape enclosures, and camouflage instantly. Some researchers believe they exhibit proto-consciousness, planning, remembering, even recognizing individual humans. Now scale that up, multiply the size by 1,000, add centuries of myth, and now imagine it doesn't just live in the deep, it belongs there. In parts of French Polynesia, fishermen avoid certain caves along the reef shelf, not because of sharks, but because the arms come from there. These are not superstitions of children, these are practical, ocean literate people who depend on the sea for survival, and they say don't fish near the blowholes, don't anchor near that shelf, and if you feel the current change when there's no wind, leave. It's the octopus spirits. Sometimes the stories say these beings don't harm directly, they entangle, confuse, pull you in with curiosity. Just like the creature itself, octopuses explore first, then they grip. And in these legends, that's the worst kind of trap, one you never even recognize as a trap until it's already wrapped around your ankles. One local legend tells of a canoe pulled under without a splash. All that remained was a single paddle, floating upright, as if placed there, not dropped, returned. To the untrained eye, the ocean looks calm, but underneath, arms, and not just any arms, arms that stretch from trench to island, from legend to present, from the past into you, which raises a bigger question. What else in the deep isn't what it seems? Because the next creature is real, documented, filmed, named. It swims through the water like a ribbon of myth, its body shimmering silver and too long to be believed. But for centuries, people thought it was a sea serpent. We now call it the oarfish. 28. Oarfish serpent myths. For centuries, sailors described seeing something impossibly long, impossibly thin, and impossibly alive, gliding just beneath the ocean's surface. A silver ribbon with the head of a dragon, a fin like a frill of flames, and eyes like polished coins, watching, always watching. They called it a sea serpent, of course. What else could it have been? But eventually, we caught one. Not a myth, not a phantom, a very real creature pulled out of the water by accident, long, serpentine, alive, and utterly alien. The world knows it now as the oarfish, a real species, Regalicus gleason, often cited as the longest bony fish in existence, capable of growing up to 36 feet or more. It swims vertically, head pointed upward, trailing its ribbon-like body like a tail from a kite. It has a long dorsal fin running the length of its body, giving it the appearance of a living streamer, and its color, silver, shining, ethereal. It looks like a scroll of moonlight sliced into the shape of a blade. It doesn't look real, and it certainly doesn't behave like any fish we know. But here's where things get strange. The oarfish isn't rare because it doesn't exist. It's rare because it lives where we can't follow, in the deep, far deeper than human divers go without machines. It only comes to the surface when it's sick, dying, or when something in the depths goes wrong. That's when they wash ashore, thin, ghostly, and usually already beyond saving. Which is why, in many cultures across the Pacific, the appearance of an oarfish is not just strange, it's a warning. In Japan, the oarfish is known as the Ryugu no Tsukai, or messenger from the sea god's palace. For centuries, coastal communities believed that when one of these rare, glimmering beasts appeared near the shoreline, it was a sign that something terrible was about to happen, usually an earthquake or tsunami. And curiously, the belief wasn't unfounded. In the lead up to the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, at least a dozen oarfish were found washed ashore or entangled in fishing nets across Japan's coast. Local fishermen took it as an omen. Scientists scoffed at the superstition. Then the earth shifted. Now, to be clear, correlation isn't causation. The ocean is filled with noise and pattern and coincidence, but something about the oarfish refuses to slide neatly into our taxonomic comfort zone. It lives in the deep pelagic zone, far below sunlight, near underwater ridges and subduction zones. It's exposed to the tremors of the earth long before we feel them, sensitive to shifts in pressure, electromagnetic pulses, subtle tidal warps, movements we can't yet detect with precision. So when the oarfish surfaces, it may very well know something we don't. And if you were a coastal villager standing barefoot on a shoreline that has never stopped shifting beneath your feet, you'd listen to that gleaming sliver of muscle and myth when it crawls onto your beach and dies. You wouldn't just see a fish, you'd see a message. There's also something almost too perfect about the way the oarfish lines up with older sea serpent myths. Take accounts from 19th century sailors in the Pacific, ships spotting ribbons slithering just under the surface, curling and rising in slow, fluid arcs, too long for a whale, too coordinated for floating debris. Descriptions line up eerily well with how an oarfish might appear in motion, especially if seen from above, just a long, glistening ripple snaking through the water, vertical fins fluttering like flames. Now imagine seeing that through fog, with no name for it, no Wikipedia page, and no scientific language to soften its silhouette. You would have done what every terrified sailor did. You would have called it a monster. The irony, of course, is that the oarfish is harmless. It doesn't hunt people. It doesn't drag ships under. It has no fangs, no venom, no ill intent. But that might be why it unsettles us so deeply. It's a serpent with no malice, a monster with no appetite, a beast that rises not to attack, but to warn. And we're not used to monsters doing that. Because if the oarfish isn't here to hurt us, if it's here to tell us something, then the real terror isn't in the creature. It's in the message. It's in the idea that the ocean has messengers at all, that it has something to say, that it notices us, and that when something wakes up down there, something huge, buried, angry, or just shifting, the first sign won't be a roar. It'll be a silver ribbon, breaching, flickering, dying at your feet. But if that's the warning, then what exactly are we being warned about? Some say it might be connected to one of the most mysterious sounds ever recorded, one that scientists eventually gave a rational explanation for. Mostly, they called it the bloop, but for a while, people thought it came from a creature, a big one. 29. Bloop creature, the bloop myth. It started with a sound, a low, guttural, pulsing sound, less like a roar and more like the kind of vibration you feel in your ribs before you hear it in your ears. And it came from somewhere beneath the southeastern Pacific Ocean. In 97, a team of scientists from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, picked it up on a network of deep sea microphones originally built during the Cold War to detect submarines. But this wasn't a sub. This wasn't anything they'd ever heard before. The sound was loud, incredibly loud. So loud, in fact, that it was picked up by hydrophones more than 3,000 miles apart. For perspective, that's like a whisper being heard across the continental United States. It was eventually given a nickname, the bloop. Clinical, almost cute, but the sound itself, not cute, not even close, because the bloop didn't sound like tectonic activity or iceberg shearing. It sounded organic. For years, that one word, organic, set off an avalanche of speculation. If the bloop came from a living organism, then whatever made it would have to be huge, larger than a blue whale, larger than anything known to science, a living mass moving through the deepest part of the ocean, where pressure crushes metal, where light doesn't reach, where maps stop and sonar refuses to return clean answers. It didn't take long for the internet and then the media to turn the bloop into a legend. Some thought it was a new species of deep-sea leviathan. Others claimed it was a government cover-up. A few more ambitious theorists connected it to Lovecraftian horror, specifically Cthulhu, the Great Old One, said to sleep beneath the Pacific in a sunken city called Arlaye. And wouldn't you know it, the bloop's origin point was almost exactly where Lovecraft had placed Relaya, just west of the southern tip of South America, deep in the South Pacific. Now, was that just a coincidence? Yes, absolutely, maybe. But the overlap was just uncanny enough to stick. And here's where things get murkier. In 2012, NOAA issued a formal explanation. The bloop, they said, had been caused by ice quakes, massive icebergs cracking and shifting in Antarctica, a natural, if rare, occurrence. The pressure and movement of ancient glacial masses releasing deep sea sound waves strong enough to echo across oceans. End of mystery. Except not everyone believed it. Not because they wanted monsters, though let's be honest, many did, but because the icequake theory didn't explain everything. Not the shape of the sound signature, not the odd repeating structure, not the fact that no iceberg movements of that scale were recorded in that region at the time, and certainly not the fact that no such bloop had ever been heard before or since with quite the same profile. Besides, if it was just an iceberg, why did the sound stop? That's the problem with explanations in oceanic mysteries. They tend to be too late, too convenient, or too incomplete. It's easy to say case closed when you're looking at the surface, but the deeper you go, the fewer explanations work. Pressure distorts signals, time swallows evidence, and something down there might not want to be found. Here's a theory that still circulates in the darker corners of marine science. The bloop was not the creature itself. It was a side effect, the sound of something massive moving, rolling over, shifting in its sleep, a dorsal fin grazing a trench wall, a limb brushing the seabed, or worse, the sound of something waking up. It didn't surface, it didn't scream, it didn't breach, it adjusted, and then it went silent. For many who study the ocean, that silence is the worst part. Not what we hear, but what we don't. Because silence doesn't mean absence. It means a pause, a decision, a potential. The idea of a creature so vast, so quiet,
and so old that its only presence is a single, inexplicable note on a sonar graph. That's more terrifying than any fanged kraken or sea serpent because it means the ocean isn't just hiding monsters, it's hiding ones that are smarter than us, ones that choose not to be seen. The bloop became a symbol, not just of the unknown, but of the unspoken. It reminded us that the ocean still has corners that aren't mapped and probably shouldn't be, that some answers don't satisfy, that some questions don't want to be asked. And if the bloop really was a creature, if it was something older than mammals, deeper than fear, and clever enough to surface only once, then the silence that followed isn't comfort, it's a countdown. Because even if we don't know what made the bloop, we know this: the ocean doesn't play one off games, it doesn't make noise without consequence, and legends don't stick for no reason. Which brings us to our final creature. It has the bite of a shark, the arms of an octopus, and the reputation of something stitched together by nature in a moment of existential bad mood. They call it the Luska.
30. Lusca, mixed monster variants. The sea doesn't always bother with elegance. Sometimes it improvises. Enter the Lusca, a creature that sounds like a nightmare from a biologist's fever dream. Half shark, half octopus, all hostility. Think of a giant set of tentacles wrapped around a serrated mouth full of rows of teeth, capable of dragging prey, human or otherwise, into underwater caves and fissures, the kind of animal that doesn't chase you across open water, but waits in the dark, in places your flashlight won't reach. The last thing you feel is the pull, originating from Caribbean folklore, especially in the blue holes of the Bahamas. The Lusca is typically associated with the Atlantic side of things, but like all good ocean legends, its edges are fuzzy. The idea of a hybrid monster, part mollusk, part apex predator, shows up in multiple maritime cultures, and recently the Lusca has migrated west, or at least its reputation has, because when you really think about it, the Pacific is the natural home for something like the Lusca. Let's start with the ingredients. The octopus, already unnerving in its natural form, is a master of camouflage, problem solving, and anatomical absurdity. No bones, no rules. It can fit through openings the size of a coin and manipulate objects with eerie precision. Its brain isn't centralized. Each arm has semi-independent neural control. In other words, an octopus isn't a creature, it's a committee. The shark, meanwhile, is an evolutionary blunt instrument designed for speed, bite, and the slow, methodical art of following a blood trail across miles of current. There's no mystery to a shark, really. It's hunger with fins, but imagine something that thinks like an octopus and kills like a shark. That's the Lusca. And while the Caribbean gets credit for the name, Pacific divers and fishermen have been telling stories about tentacled sharks and suction bite things for generations. In regions like Palau, the Solomon Islands, and parts of the Philippines, there are whispered warnings about underwater caves, places where fish vanish, bubbles don't rise, and boats have a tendency to list ever so slightly toward the reef shelf. It's not superstition, it's survival instinct. Marine biologists sometimes chalk this up to misidentified giant Pacific octopuses, which can grow to extraordinary sizes and are known to be both territorial and occasionally aggressive. But giant octopuses don't have shark teeth, and they certainly don't swim in the patterns some divers have described, straight line sprints like a torpedo with a mind. There's also the phenomenon of the blue hole, circular underwater sinkholes that drop off sharply from coral reefs, often leading to vast cave systems. The Bahamas has them. So does the South Pacific. These places are not well mapped. Currents behave strangely inside them. Pressure warps perception. Echoes rebound in impossible ways. These are exactly the kinds of places where something like the Lusca would live, and exactly the kind of places where disappearances are common and difficult to explain. A popular tale from a Micronesian archipelago tells of a diving team who went searching for a rare coral species in an unmapped cave system. The team had full gear, comms, lights, backup tanks. They descended one by one, entering what appeared to be a gentle tunnel. 15 minutes later, the guide rope went slack. The divers didn't return. Only the first team member resurfaced, alone, in shock, unable to speak. When investigators checked the recorded footage, they found scrambled video, inexplicable flashes, and near the very end, a frame showing something that looked like an arm, but not human, thick, muscled, covered in what appeared to be short, chitinous filaments. The video cut off before the full shape could be seen. To this day, locals refuse to fish near that reef, not because they believe in monsters, but because they believe in patterns. And patterns suggest that something down there doesn't want to be found. And when it is found, it answers with silence. The Lusca doesn't need to make sense. In fact, it probably shouldn't. It's a hybrid in a world that insists on categories. It doesn't belong to a taxonomy or a family tree. It belongs to the deep, a place where nature experiments in darkness, building things that are functional, not pretty. And that's the final irony of the Lusca. It's not chaos, it's efficiency. It's a reminder that monsters don't have to be mythical to be terrifying. They just have to be well adapted. The Lusca doesn't defy biology, it outperforms it. And with that, the gallery of Pacific Ocean monsters closes for now, but the ocean doesn't close. It doesn't sleep. It doesn't forget. It waits. It builds. It catalogs every vessel that crosses its surface and every secret sunk beneath it, because the scariest thing in the sea isn't what we know. It's what we keep finding over and over, century after century, with different names, different shapes, but always the same truth. We are not alone out there.